Within the last 10 years, an historic democratic shift has taken place. More than 50% of the world's population now live in cities. How does this shape what we believe as Christians? Well, we're going to talk about that next on Significant Insights. Hello and welcome to the program. Good to have you with us. You know, Chicago is the third largest city in this country, and California is the home to Los Angeles, the country's second largest city. It's projected that by the year 2050, 70% of the world's population would live in cities. Cities contain a lot of wealth and power, but they also house some of the most vulnerable communities. How believers engage with cities and those who live there is really of great importance. Dr. Toly is an associate professor of urban studies, politics, and international relations at Wheaton College. He's written one of a four-part series on ordinary theology, how we bring God of the Bible into our everyday lives. Dr. Toly has written about this with regard to urban life. His book is Cities of Tomorrow and the City to Come. You're an urbanist. What does that mean?
That means I study the causes and consequences of the urban condition. So why do we have cities and what do they mean? What do we get because we have cities?
From a biblical perspective, necessarily or not necessarily?
Sometimes, yeah, I'll come back to that. The origins and implications of urban issues and the presence and influence of cities in the world. And some of that for me means I take a pretty typical social science perspective on those questions. I'm trained in public policy and marshaling a number of different social science methodologies in order to look at cities and urban life. And as a professor at Wheaton College specifically, I also marshal theological resources to help us think through those same questions.
It appears that while cities are growing, while you have massive migration into some of the largest cities of the world, cities are in trouble. So often you go to the core of the city and it's chaotic. It's a shell with the vibrance of the city almost outside the city in sort of protected enclaves. So when you talk about where cities are today and where they're going, how do you perceive it? Is it positive? Is it negative?
Well, I think it's positive in the sense of vibrant economically. Our cities are typically the places that are concentrating opportunity. In fact, they're concentrating opportunity even to the detriment often of their hinterlands. And that's something that we need to reckon with in our politics and our social and cultural life. The fact that most of our economic opportunity is concentrating in a few large cities. And even medium-sized cities are being quite left out of that growth.
When you say city,
yeah,
how do you define it for your discussion purposes?
There are a number of ways to define what we mean by city. When I say urban, I typically refer to an urban agglomeration, an urban metro area.
More of a metroplex.
Exactly.
Like the Chicago metroplex, which
Sure.
is approximately 8 million people.
Sure, that's exactly right. So that would include the suburbs of Chicago. It wouldn't include rural areas around Chicago. And that's mostly because the way it's typically defined has to do with population density and the density of certain infrastructure that helps to build up cities. And that means that we basically have, around most of the world, a binary. You have urban areas, you have rural areas. Suburbs are particular odd constructions that belong to the city in some way, but have a strange relationship with it, historically speaking.
It seems to me they contribute to the city, they take from the city, and they contribute to the city.
That's right.
They contribute to the city because they come in and work in the city and they spend their money, and then they take from the city because they take all the money back to their neighborhoods and invest it in other places.
That's largely true. And in the United States, historically, the suburbs have been constructed through flight from cities since just after World War II. In other parts of the world where there are also large suburbs, It's quite the opposite from what we experienced in the late 20th century in the United States. In many parts of the world, to be suburban means to be marginalized, means to be vulnerable, to be poor, and left out of the city's core.
You know, an interesting thing is you go to downtown Chicago, and I would consider downtown Chicago, the city, the center city, very vibrant. It's active, it's energetic. There's a lot of things going on. You have a lot of neighborhoods where there's a lot of energy and people doing things and living out their lives. On the other hand, I went to Hartford, Connecticut, and the downtown, even Washington, D.C., and you go to the Washington, D.C., and the inner core, that downtown area, has some vibrancy, but at the same time, there's a great sense of decay. Of it kind of coming apart on them, and that decay seems to be moving out. They're protected areas, but that's a whole different culture in those areas, and it kind of got to but the inner core, the community, that doesn't seem to happen. Is that characteristic of what's happening, as you see it from an urban standpoint?
It's characteristic of many cities, and I would tend not to put it as a cultural matter, but as a structural matter. I think there's a relationship between that vibrant downtown area in many cases and other places that are economically distressed. As one of the greatest historians and sociologists of urban areas of the late 20th century, early 21st century, Janet Abu-Lughod has put it, Chicago, and in this way Chicago stands in for many cities, has an elegant facade and a deeply shadowed backstage. Now, that metaphor comes from theater, obviously. Initially, people take it just to mean Chicago has its fancy parts, and it's not fancy parts. It's parts that get attention, and it's parts that don't get attention. But she means a whole lot more than that. If we think about what happens in theater with in front of the facade and behind the facade or backstage, you have people working backstage that are essential to the show going on, but whose work is usually not seen. And in theater, that's intentional. In parts of Chicago's history, that's been intentional too. But for most of Chicago's history and for most of the people who are in Chicago's deeply shadowed backstage, it's simply that they're marginalized by the activity that creates a great city like that. And in Chicago's case, like in the theater, folks who are in the deeply shadowed backstage are part of the tech crew, let's say. They're all dressed in black. In Chicago, most of the historic social fractures have been around race, and its African-American community has been most left behind of any of them. And so Abu-Lughod there has been very pointed about the very thing that you just pointed out, which is that you often have these vibrant places in the city, and in the very same city, you have economic distress. It's like boom and bust aren't cycles, they're places, one right next door to the other.
We'll talk about believers' responsibility to vulnerable communities, about the growth of megacities, and why creation care has everything to do with caring for distressed communities. That's coming up right after this.
People are flooding into cities like London, Toronto, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, which are the most diverse cities in the world, from all over the world. And there's a building in Hong Kong, a single building, where more than 100 different languages are spoken, and as primary languages.
Welcome back. Today, Urban Studies professor Dr. Noah Toly and I are talking about a theology of urban life from his book, Cities of Tomorrow and the City to Come. We begin part two talking about the important role believers have in engaging with their communities. A lot of what you talk about in your book, Noah, is how do Christians assimilate and become an intentional part of community.
Sure.
So how do we do that? Where does it start?
Yeah. And I want to point out that I intentionally left that question more or less unresolved and ended the book with prayer.
Yeah.
Precisely because it's so difficult, also because it's lived out in such different ways. But I do think there are some good starting points. And I think one of them is that Christians can't live in their communities as if they're just another interest group, as if they're just trying to make sure that the programs, the institutions, the social structures that govern or shape their lives or their communities simply ensure their welfare or promote their well-being or their wealth. I think Christians need to be about the welfare of their neighbors, and they need to take others' interests into their own. Whether they're thinking about that at the highest structural levels from City Hall or the C-suite of some corporation, or they're thinking about that from the grassroots or in their everyday lives in their neighborhoods.
You talk about the role of Christians and also in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Of the inner city environment, and talk about brownfields.
Mm-hmm.
Brownfields being polluted sections of town, and how we should respond as Christians. Talk about that.
Well, you mentioned brownfields in particular, and I know you had an experience with one in Chicago.
Yes, we did.
And I mentioned in the book a project that was called Zero Brownfields Future in Wilmington, Delaware. It didn't actually happen, and partly because zero brownfields is an aspirational goal more than a real policy goal. It's not a measurable thing. Unfortunately, we're not in a place where we can actually remediate all of those brownfields just because it's expensive. We have trade-offs with other real goods like education or nutrition. But I think it's important for us to see that the kinds of challenges brownfields represent, that is soil pollution, or more broadly environmental challenges like air pollution, water pollution, are actually real community development challenges too. That the communities that have been most vulnerable, most marginalized economically, typically in the US, also communities of predominantly minorities, have been most affected by urban pollution. And we need to make every effort we can to redress that situation.
Do you believe that the average evangelical Christian really understands or accepts their responsibility as a keeper of the garden?
No, I don't. You know, we all fall short. So we can affirm that as Christians. So when I say that I don't believe we understand and accept our responsibility as keepers of the garden, or even keepers of our brothers, to put it in another biblical way, not far from the garden actually, that story in Genesis 3 and 4, I include myself. I don't do enough on that, but I think we ought not to ignore it. We ought to take seriously God's commands for us to embrace the flourishing of our neighbors and creation, to actually be good stewards of the earth, and that's to honor Him.
Again, regarding community, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about the suburbs, and really the suburbs have become much more of a homogenic kind of gathering, so that most of the people are kind of like you. You know, and so they move to a neighborhood because we have wanted to get away from all the differences in personalities. But when you move into the city, in a place like Uptown or any city, and you move into this center, you have all kinds of different people, and they're going to be in the churches. They're going to, you have all kinds of nationalities. The Bible says that we, to a large degree, are our brother's keeper. What does that mean in terms of community when we're talking about urbanization and the urban Christian?
I think that God made us to be for God, to be for creation, and to be for others. And we too often give in to our sinful impulse to be for ourselves. This starts every day when we wake up and we walk outside and we see somebody that is different from us, other than ourselves, and have to take their interests into our own interests. in serious ways. And I think that's our primary way, that needs to be our primary way of thinking about what it means to be our brother's keeper, that what's in their interest is in ours.
You talk about the city of the future. How do you envision the city of the future?
Well, it's hard to say. I think that actually I stand with a number of urbanists right now who are reminding us that at very few points in history would we have been able to predict the next big transformation that happens with cities, or even why cities grow the way that they do. But you can see a few things on the horizon right now. One is that they're growing to proportions that we actually have never seen before. We have multiple cities, over 20 million people in the world. People are flooding into cities like London, Toronto, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, which are the most diverse cities in the world, from all over the world. And there's a building in Hong Kong, a single building, where more than 100 different languages are spoken.
Wow.
And as primary languages. And these mega cities actually have new and different governance issues, new and different development challenges. And so that kind of dynamic is much more common in a lot of our cities. It's not new. It was even true of ancient Cairo, for example, that people from all over the known world lived there at one time. But we have a smaller world now, in a sense. We're more connected to each other. We're aware of these things in different ways. Another dynamic to point out is the role of big data, that we're now learning more about how we live together, how we interact with the environment, because we can capture so much information about the way we live together in cities. Because with so many people in cities, we can capture really previously unimaginable amounts of data and process those and try to harness that for our good. And then the final piece is that cities are projecting their power all over the world. Cities are not only governing within their own territory, but are reaching out beyond their territory and trying to bring about what they think is positive change.
Are you hopeful?
I am.
What I'm primarily talking about is from the Christian perspective.
Yeah.
Do you see a willingness on the part of Christians to have a noble cause?
I do, absolutely. And there are some fantastic projects out there on this. One of them is the Thriving Cities Project, based out of University of Virginia originally. Now it's the Thriving Cities Group. There are many Christian voices involved with that project. I've been on the steering committee for that project, and it really is about seeking flourishing urban communities for everyone. Another is the Social Cities program out of Cardis, which is a Canadian think tank. They've actually partnered with a researcher at University of Pennsylvania to try to identify what is the value added of religious organizations, specifically congregations in communities. And while it's not Christian only, it includes Christian congregations. And the value added is pretty amazing for every tax dollar foregone by having a congregation in your community and them occupying some property that you're not taxing, for example. There are 4 that come back to the community.
You know, that's really a remarkable statistics and a hopeful one about the positive impact that faith makes in a community. You can get more information on Dr. Noah Toly at noahtoly.com. You can also get his book, Cities of Tomorrow and the City to Come, online wherever books are sold. Final thoughts on creating a community of honor right after the break.
When Jesus walked this earth, he put value into people that had no value. If you remember John 4, the woman at the well, the disciples saw this as a distraction and a waste of time. Jesus saw an evangelist and he put honor on that woman.
Today, among other things, Dr. Noah Toly reminded us that as believers, we're to be for God, for creation, and for our neighbors. Dave Patterson, founding pastor of the Father's House in Northern California, builds on this idea when he encourages us to emulate Jesus in treating others with honor. He says that when we do this, we'll create communities of honor. Here's more from Dave and today's final thoughts.
Hey, I want to take just a moment and talk to you about building a culture of honor in your life. You know, we live in a society and in a day where dishonor is really highlighted, it's promoted, it's endorsed through social media platforms and television media, the dishonoring of authority and people. And I just want to encourage you and challenge you to live in a counterculture and live in a culture of honor. You know, there's a verse in the book of Revelation that says there was a declaration made about God that blessing and honor and glory and power be unto the one who sits upon the throne. And honor is the gravity or the atmosphere of heaven. And honor means this, it means a decision where we place worth and a high value on something or someone. And I want to read you one verse. Romans 12:10 says, love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. What does that mean? It means we place value on people. We place value on leadership. We place value on political leaders in our nation. And we place value on those who've never experienced honor. And this is where the kingdom of God is going to thrive in your life. Think about this. When Jesus walked this earth, He put value into people that had no value. If you remember John 4, the woman at the well, the disciples saw this as a distraction and a waste of time. Jesus saw an evangelist, and He put honor on that woman. Blind Bartimaeus screaming on the side of the road. The disciples saw, hey, we're wasting time. He's stopping the crusade. Jesus saw him as a miracle. A fellow by the name of Gideon, he saw himself as weak and fearful. God looked at him and said, you mighty man of valor. You see, God puts value on people who don't see value in their lives, and the kingdom of God comes. I want to challenge you this year. Put value on people who don't think they're worthy. Recognize the qualities in their life. Take delight in honoring one another, and guess what will happen? The kingdom of God will come. Blessing means to praise. Book of Revelation. Honor, put high value on people and on God Himself. And that's where we'll see the power and the glory. The glory is this Hebrew word, the kabod or kabod, the weight of God. And the power is the dunamis. It's the ability to live an overcoming life. If you'll start honoring God, His house, His leadership, and people around you that have never experienced honor, you're going to see the kingdom come. And you're going to thrive in your life in the presence of God. So what do you say? We be people of honor and build a culture of honor.
Thank you, Dave Patterson. We appreciate that. And also Dr. Noah Toly. Good to have you on the program today. You know, as Christians, if we're not careful, we tend to be very homogenous. We tend to stick with people that we feel comfortable with and have a tendency not to get out of our framework of that comfort zone. It was interesting talking about who Jesus went to. He went to some people who were not terribly popular, and He spent time with those people because He understood their need. And I think it's important for us also to reach out beyond just our Christian friends and find places that we can engage other people who are not exactly like us. I remember on one of our Israel tours a number of years ago, at the end of the tour, one of the ladies stood up to give her testimony, African American, and she said, you know, I grew up in the black community, went to black schools, went to a black college, and I never really met very many white people, and I didn't like them. And she said, on this tour, I've met some wonderful white people, and we've had a wonderful time together. And she said, and it's given me a whole nother perspective on who they are. And I think it's the same thing for those of us who are Caucasian, to reach out, to find other friends who are non-Christian friends and other ethnics, and spend time and learn and commit ourselves to that kind of diversity. Thanks for joining me. God bless you.